Hello incels and femcells. In this video we're going to be reviewing Chasca's signature bow, Astral Vulture's Crimson Plumage. Obviously, as I always say, this is not a review for the weapon on Chasca herself. On herself it's going to be pretty good, better than all of the weapons by a long shot. So if you're watching this video for Chasca alone, then get this weapon, that's for sure. But this video is more of a review on this weapon as a whole for most bow characters, if it's going to be good for your account as an investment and stuff like that. Before we continue that though, if you're trying to get this weapon and its refinements, you're going to need quite a lot of Primo gems and Genesis crystals, and the best way to get them is going to be throughout Lootbar GG. Lootbar is a game top-up website where you can buy different games currencies, including Genshin Impact. It's very safe and secure, and it's also cheaper than the official game stores. For example, if you click the link in the description, you go to Genshin Impact, you can pick an offer. I'm going to pick this offer right here. In the official game store, it's going to cost me around $50. On Lootbar, it's around $40.50. And it can be even less with other coupons and stuff like that, like the 8% discount coupon for new customers. That means I saved almost $10, which is super good. Lootbar, you can always save up to 20% in a lot of good deals. But yeah, just pick the offer, put your user ID and your region, click on top up now, and then you just pay, and then you just wait a couple of minutes and the Genesis crystals are going to be in your game. Those are some of the latest reviews we have from Lootbar. Click the link in the description and top up now. Alright, so back to the video, moving on to the base stats of the weapon. This weapon is going to have 608 base attack at level 90, and it's going to have a crit damage substat with 66% at level 92. Those are going to be like balanced stats, which is pretty good. The base attack is average for a 5-star weapon, and also the substat is going to be average for a 5-star weapon, which is pretty good. That means it's going to be more universal in general. Now, moving on to the most important thing, which is the passive of the weapon. First of all, we have for 12 seconds after triggering a swirl reaction, your attack is going to be increased by 24%. So you need to trigger a swirl reaction by the character equipping this weapon themselves. And after you do that, you're going to gain 24% attack. That's going to be very limited though. It pretty much means the character equipping this weapon needs to be a Nemo for them to get this buff, because a Nemo cannot be applied on enemies. So for you to trigger a swirl reaction, a swirl is going to be a Nemo plus an element. Since a Nemo cannot be applied to enemies, that means the other element, let's say Pyro for example, needs to be applied to the enemy, and then you trigger it by applying a Nemo. So the character needs to be able to apply a Nemo, which obviously means that he needs to be a Nemo, which obviously limits them a lot. But this is only a part of the passive. You're not going to be able to get the 24% attack unless your character is a Nemo. But we have the second part of the passive, is that in addition, when one or two or more characters in the party are of different elemental type from the equipping character, the damage dealt by the equipping character's charge attack is going to be increased by either 20 or 48%. So if you have one, it's going to be 20%. If you have two or more, it's going to be 48%. And your elemental burst damage dealt is going to be increased by 10 or 24%, which is pretty good. So as long as you have different element characters on your team, the characters equipping this weapon is going to gain 48% of charge attack's damage bonus, which is super good, and 24% elemental burst damage bonus, which is pretty good. The second part of the passive is not going to be related at all to the first part of the passive, so you don't need to swirl, you don't need to do anything, you just need two different characters in your part, which is super good. It's going to be very consistent, always active, you don't need to do anything to activate it, and that's going to be pretty good for a lot of characters. It's going to be a very reliable passive, in my opinion at least. Good damage bonus, as long as you fix up your teams, you can forget about it, and you're going to have it for the whole battle. So in general, what can this weapon give you is 24% attack, 48% charge attack damage bonus, 24% elemental burst damage bonus, and then 66% crit damage from the passive. For you to gain the attack damage, your character needs to be a Nemo to be able to swirl. For the charge attack damage bonus and the elemental burst, you need different party members, and the crit damage is just a substat, so everyone's gonna have it. So moving on to the characters who can use this weapon, honestly I feel like these stats can be pretty decently universal. So if we're talking about obviously the characters who can fully use this weapon, I would think it's only gonna be Chasca probably, because she's the only Nemo main DPS who can apply swirl still, who's like obviously a bow user, and she can take full advantage out of this weapon. It's gonna give her the attack, she uses her charge attack, so it's gonna buff it by a lot, and her elemental burst is gonna deal some damage too, which is this weapon's gonna buff it, which is pretty good. So yeah, Chasca is really the only real user who can fully use this weapon. You can use stuff like, for example, DPS Venti or DPS Farzan, like hyper carries. This weapon's gonna work on it pretty well, but those are not really meant to be played like that, so I wouldn't really count. So yeah, the only real character who can fully use this weapon is gonna be Chasca, and that's it. Now moving on for characters who can partly use this weapon, which is like the second tier of users I would say for this weapon. First tier is like Chasca. Second tier I would say are characters who can deal charge attacks damage. You know, any character character who's a bow user and who deals damage with their charge attacks. As long as they have different party members, you can use this weapon with. So for that, we can list the obvious bow charge attack users. You have Tilnary, for example. He can definitely use this weapon. It's going to be pretty decent on him. You have Ganyu. She's going to be able to use this weapon. It depends on the team, obviously. In like a full cryo team or whatever, it's probably not going to work. But in general, you can probably use this weapon as long as you have two different elements. It's going to give her a lot of charge attacks damage bonus, which is going to be pretty good with Ganyu. So yeah, it's going to be a super good weapon on Ganyu too. Line is probably going to be able to use this weapon. I mean, his teams are not going to be the best for this weapon if you're playing him in like a strict mono pirate team, but you don't really need that. As long as you're playing him with like another pyro, you're probably good. So you can use this weapon as long as you're playing him with two different element characters. It's going to buff his charge attacks and his elemental burst damage bonus, which is pretty good on him, plus the crit damage and stuff like that. And then finally, Setos is also a charge attack bow DPS. This weapon can give him crit damage, which is pretty good on him, and it can also buff his charge attacks by a lot, which is pretty good. Also, his elemental burst damage bonus is going to be one of the best users for this weapon too. So these are the only four really I can think of. Those are the characters or bow users who use their charge attacks as like a mean of damage. Other than that, really any bow user can use this weapon, but mainly just for like the crit damage as a stat stick. So any main DPS can normally use this weapon, like Fischl, for example. Child can also benefit from it a little bit with his burst and charge attacks, which is pretty good, but it's not going to be the best user. But yeah, you got like Yellen, for example, Oron, whatever. Any character who can benefit from crit can probably still use this weapon, and it's going to be a decent stat stick on them. Definitely not the best because most of the passive is not going to be used, but it's going to be a decent stat stick. So would I say this weapon is going to be good? I would say honestly, it's not bad, especially compared to the latest like 5-star weapons. I'd say it's kind of decently universal, to be honest. Not many characters can use it fully, but it's going to be pretty good on pretty much any bow user who uses charge attacks, which is kind of a broad range. You have like a couple of 5-6 characters who can use this weapon. So I'd say it's pretty decent. And other than that, you can just use it as a crit stat stick. So that's always pretty good. Obviously, it's definitely not the best bow like for your account. So I still wouldn't like technically recommend you going for it. If you just want one bow forever, that's gonna be having like the super good value for your account. You can check out my best weapons to have, and this is definitely not gonna be the one, but in general, it's not a bad value bow. If you're trying to get it for like a period of time and you want to like use it on multiple characters, you can. It's a good stat stick. It's gonna be pretty decent on a lot of characters. So yeah, it's not a bad pick. It's not a super good pick, but it's definitely not a bad pick too. I'd say it's a decent weapon. I'd give it like a decent 6 out of 10. But yeah, that was the video, guys. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.